Richard is Vice President of Client Services here at Allen Interactions, and he oversees our Tampa office. He has spent the past 15 years designing and implementing web-based training and tools to support improved workplace performance. His efforts have been in both academia and private industry, including working with many Fortune 500 companies. Richard is responsible for promoting value-driven consulting and design throughout all Allen Interactions partnerships. He is the co-author of Leaving Addy for Sam, and he holds a doctorate of education from the University of West Florida. We are also delighted today to have Angel Green, Senior Instructional Strategist, with us, and she's also located in our Tampa office. She will be fielding questions coming in through the questions pane from all of you throughout the hour, helping to facilitate today's discussion about SAM. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Richard.
Well, good afternoon. Can you hear me all right, Carrie?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to have the opportunity to take a little time out in the middle of the week and in the middle of the day to discuss SAM. As well, I hope many of you know, and we've saw through registrations that many of you are aware that Michael Allen and I had the fortunate opportunity to co-author with him our latest book on our process. It's certainly not the first one, and we've been doing this for some time. And SAM is a particular important process to me specifically. It is what we do at Allen Interactions, and it is certainly something that I believe produces a much more quality experience in our partnerships for the quality of the training that we create, as well as the opportunities that are provided there to uncover expectations and inspiration, as I like to say, through the design process. So I'm hoping I can get to some of all that SAM is today. It will be certainly impossible to address all of it in the short amount of time we have together, but I'm going to give a good stab at it and go over some of the things that I think are critical and essential. And so to start off, we want to see basically the kind of cornerstone to any instructional design process, specifically SAM, is the role that you play in it. And so we're going to ask one of the poll questions that we have to start with is, what role do you have, and what role do you serve in the instructional design process, either in your organization or as independently? And it should be, all right, I launched the poll. And you can start filling that out. I'm going to keep talking as we're filling that out. Just wanted to get an idea. Looks like we're racing to mostly designer, which includes developer and otherwise. But SAM, early on when I was introduced to it, and I came out of the university setting, to say that I had training and and education in more traditional processes would be an understatement. I spent many years doing that. But I was working at the time developing a web-based training tool for teachers to help them create standards-based instruction. And so we were teaching teachers online to create standards-based instruction and curriculum, and it posed a lot of challenges. And some of the struggles that we had when we were going through creating our online performance support system really started pushing me away from some of the traditional models that I had been so comfortable with. And it was just by pure luck when I came to Allen that this is more like what I'm much more comfortable with, an iterative process. They're going to try to identify expectations and look for ways that we can touch and feel and experience the end product as early as possible. And that's really what SAM offers us the opportunity to do. So it's going to give us a process that we can go through and work with others. And as we see, there are a whole range of us here today. It looks like about 70% are falling in the designer group.
I have company.
Yes, you do. And with the learning manager at 11 and 13% learning consultant and 7 at the learning executive, which is another thing that I was intrigued when I first came across. At the time, although we've always referred to it as successive approximation, we had referred to it generally and internally here as savvy, because that's what we do to start off this project, and I'll explain that in a moment. But I was really excited about the fact that it provided us means to communicate the design and our work and our effort in process with senior leadership, who are the ones, and stakeholders, who are the ones that are obviously funding these projects and initiating these projects, and it gave us the ability to communicate with them, and I was really excited about that as well. So before we move to the next, before I kind of move on and talk about SAM, I really want to open up one more poll and ask one more question. And this one happens to be, of the targets that you see below, which ones do you most struggle to achieve? Content accuracy, stakeholder expectations, learning outcomes, deadlines, budgets. There obviously are many, many, many objectives and success measures that we would have for instructional design projects, but these are generally the ones globally that we struggle. Angel, what we do and our clients is the most, would you guess, would be the most difficult success factor to achieve? We just chalk it up to those are almost impossible to meet, right? Yeah. We can't meet deadlines. They're not able to be met. Let's move on. But those are obviously important because we have to have a process that's efficient and manageable and allows us to move forward and meet those deadlines, because those are initially our stakeholder expectations, right? I'm going to give you a certain amount of money and a certain amount of time, and we need this to happen then.
In 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks.
Yesterday.
Or yesterday, yes, absolutely. But it's the this of that statement that we have to really focus on. So I appreciate you all answering those questions, and I'll go through them one more time. Content accuracy was 10%, stakeholder expectations 20%, learning outcomes 38%, deadlines 26%, and only 7% of us struggle to meet budget. Well, I am certainly in rare company today, because that is one of the bigger struggles that we have. But it's usually easier, I think, and maybe what this means to us is it's usually easier to meet a budget if you're willing to forego expectations, outcomes, deadlines, and maybe even content accuracy. Sadly, that may be what that means for us. But let's move ahead with this, and we'll talk about SAM. And SAM, or our Successive Approximation Model, is a way. It is a strategy for us to go achieve these objectives, to have success measures that we feel comfortable about discussing early and achieving by the end of the project. I have a few quotes of the presentation that come from specifically Michael. I didn't quote anything I had written in the book, but Michael had some really good gems in there, and I think they guide us through this discussion. And this one is specifically particular to this discussion today. And he was quoting where he says, it's too early to define a process unless you define the product you want it to produce. I think too often in instructional design we lose sight of that. And then when we work with projects and clients, they are driven by these success factors that we mentioned: budgets, deadlines, timelines, stakeholder expectations. And so they try and create, and usually over time do create, processes that support those organizational expectations and maybe move a little bit away from quality or engaging learning experiences. And we can't just say, or we shouldn't just say, that if we do this process and we do the process well, whatever comes out will be quality, because that's not always true. We can absolutely run a flawless project and still produce a low quality product, or a product that we hadn't expected to begin with. So it is Michael's contention, and mine as well, and all of us at Allen Interactions, that you can't uncouple product from process. You have to have a well-defined product that's going to achieve the objectives that you have. And then you have to create a process that facilitates the construction of that in the best, most efficient, manageable, engaging, collaborative way possible. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And I want to start off with some design principles. The heart of SAM, and if you have had the opportunity to see the book, and if not really any of Michael's writings, he really, when we talk process, he really tries to say, I'm not going to have an instructional design conversation, and ends up having an instructional design conversation because it's hard not to. But what really at the heart of SAM is that what we want to create is learning experiences that are meaningful, memorable, and motivational. Those are the three big M's here at Allen Interactions. Those are the three big M's that we strive for. They're our compass heading, that we want to make learning experiences that are meaningful, that are realistic, that are based in real-world activities that people deal with day in and day out, just like we normally would learn. Any of these other tasks that we personally take on in our life, we learn by mistakes, and we learn by challenges, and we learn by being presented with activities that we weren't prepared for, and we had to kind of gather our thoughts and learn on the fly. But they have to be very meaningful to us. We can't have, as I say often, a Candyland metaphor in a course that's teaching, accounting or ethics, maybe at a corporate level. It just, those things are not tied together. They're not realistic. Adults don't work through Candyland in their day-to-day lives. It may be a fun part to have in a game or something, but for the most part, the course wouldn't. It needs to be memorable. We need to present them with challenges that will really lock in their minds that knowledge and those activities and that performance that we're achieving through this instruction, so they take it back to their day-to-day workplace. They transfer that knowledge, as we all know. That's what we need it to be, is to be memorable. So we have to focus really on the activities and challenges we put in front of them. And then we need to make it motivational. And this is kind of a two-part motivational. The first part is we need to make it motivational that they see the value of moving forward right now, that they see the value of this training and this instruction, that because it's meaningful and memorable to them, they're motivated to continue on. And that it's motivational that they can see how this can improve the quality of their performance when they leave the course. And that's a pretty big measure for us, to try to create that motivational part. A lot of times we try to make things engaging and cool and spinny graphics and things and audio and hope that motivates people. It might entertain, but will they take away from it what we want them to in the back? So that's our compass heading: meaningful, memorable, motivational. Those are our three big M's. And we construct those with these four things. And again, I don't want to spend too long on this because it is important about we know where we're going to go, but I want to talk about the process. But you have to know why we do things in the process, and the reason is we want to build meaningful, memorable, motivational work. And we do that by constructing learning events, engaging learning events with four parts: context, challenge, activity, feedback, much like I described a moment ago about the meaningful context that we place people in real work experiences, real life experiences. We place a challenge in front of them that is very clear to the challenge they have to perform in and day out. If someone has to create a cup of coffee behind a bar in a coffee shop in the morning, that's what we want them to do. That's the challenge we need to communicate with customers. Construct the best cup of coffee, the triple latte or whatever it may be. Then we want to have an activity that closely resembles the performance or the challenge that we're asking. And sometimes we're limited. Obviously, being on the computer, we have only a few things that we can do. In a classroom course, you can still have activities that mirror almost exactly those kind of things, and we can construct that. And then we want to provide feedback. This is the one thing we would prefer. It was called consequences, but we called it feedback many years back. And consequences would be a better way, because we want people to see the outcomes of their choices and then derive the training and the information from there.
Yeah. I think it's so important that we talk through this part of this, the instructional design part in the piece, because I think a lot of times when you're building learning, people will take an existing project plan and put it to instructional design, whereas we've looked at it from an instructional designer's perspective and figured out a process to build that great learning. I think that's what's really different.
That is a good point. And so we feel like with both our compass of meaningful, memorable, motivational, and our pathway with context, challenge, activity, feedback, that gives us the best chance to create engaging learning experiences, and that's really what we want to do. At the end of the day, we want to create learning experiences that are highly engaging. So from there, and this was my favorite one, and I'm not even sure Michael meant it to be pulled out separately because it is in the context of another paragraph he's writing, but he stated that knowing the destination is the big threes, we can tailor a process that pushes in the right direction. And it sounds like that we did this process and we tailored to it for this book, when in reality it's been much more than a decade that we've been working, decade and a half, I guess almost, that we've been working on this and trying to identify it. And we we have added to the process to better acknowledge some of the realities of instructional design, and that we continue to look at how we execute on that process in order to best meet the needs of all of those involved, from the team members to the stakeholders to the learners, which are really what should be our focus. So let me walk through what the process is right now. It comes in 3 phases. And the only reason we have phases is so that we set a target for ourselves that's manageable, that we could stay in any one of these phases for too long and try to create too much. And we know that already. Often people believe that they have to perfect an analysis of the instruction. And so they spend months and months on this, or weeks, or really any time they're spending is really pushing the timeline on the project. And they get caught up in attempting to make it perfect, and that analysis paralysis that they have really struggles to have move forward. So that's why we have these into 3 main segments. And the first one is preparation phase. We do info gathering. It may be an initial contact. Something somehow started the need to create this project, and there's training that's needed. Either it's been identified by you and the person who's going to construct the training, or it's been identified by someone else who's come in and said, please help us, and that you are in charge of it or a part of a team that is in charge of constructing this instruction. So whatever started it, whatever the stimulus was, that first part is going to be when you start gathering information. You know, what have we done before? What has worked best? Who is this training for? Who's going to be responsible for it? Things of that nature. And then we move to the savvy start. The savvy start is the key to SAM. That this process begins with a very engaging brainstorming session. You get the work team together, and there's a whole several chapter covers on the savvy start that we have written about and continue to write about. And I don't want to go into the specific details of it, but you'll want to get in a room face to face, 7, 8, 9 people. After that, it gets to be a little bit clunky and people don't get to communicate well. And then you want to start brainstorming about the performance that's required. A little later on, I'll talk about writing content in SAM and how we handle content. But I always find it funny that we'll start off a project and everyone knows we're going to create this engaging training, and they'll walk in the room with these giant 3-ring binders of content, set it on the table and go make e-learning. And go, okay. So I pick them up and I set them on the floor and I go, we'll get back to those later. Now let's talk about what we need to do. Because what we want to do is we want to move away from how can we construct an electronic delivery of that content to how can we construct engaging and interactive learning events. And those are what we want to brainstorm. So who would be in the room? Recent learners, their managers, those people that are ultimately responsible for the performance that we're open to change, the stakeholders who brought us into the room to begin with, our team members. SMEs are a particular challenge. They could be a manager, they could be somebody that served in that role, but usually what they're going to do is focus on the content and drive you away from performance. And it's not wrong, we need them. We certainly are going to need them in the process as we move along, but we want that to be a very high intensive brainstorming session where we identify activities and interaction prototypes that emulate as best as possible the performance we hope the learners will improve on through the training. So we'll do that for 2 days. We'll have a brainstorming session. We'll go through content outlines, and I mean outlines, just high level. What are we going to do? So that we can come out of that brainstorming savvy start with 2, 3, 4 prototypes. And these prototypes should be quick and dirty and ugly, and if we don't like them, we throw them away, and they should be uncommitted. And so that would be the best.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions coming in about whether or not this process itself can be used for any. Is it only for e-learning?
No.
Is it for IT? Is it for?
It is for any, and as you will know, we use
Right.
it day in and day out,
Yeah.
for the entire range of e-learning from level 1s to level 3s and beyond, for instructor-led training, and then for the blended approach. And I find it is particularly beneficial for blended because it allows us to take the tangible construct of e-learning and apply it into the ILT, and using this process that I do find that often when we're doing ILT and when we're brainstorming, our activities are usually limited to what we've done in ILT before, and so it's hard to kind of break out of that, and it's hard to prototype those too, but it certainly fits the mold. We want to do things, the essence of SAM is that we want to create the final product as early and quickly as possible in ways that people can touch it and feel it and see it.
Right.
And so that you can practice it and go, that's not what I was thinking, or I don't think that works well, or that doesn't represent the performance objective. And that's really what we want to do. And it certainly does work across the entire range of training.
Right.
Because it focuses the team on the performance we hope and we want the learner to improve on.
And what would you say to those people who say we can't get everybody in the room at the same time, we can't get 1 to 2 hours blocked off? How do we do a condensed?
Well, two things. If you can't get everybody in the room at the same time, lucky you. Wait till you find a day when you have everyone in the room. It'll be even much worse. But I get what they're saying.
Right.
I think what you do is you still take the principles in place. In fact, you and I are starting a project soon this way. That we are still going to have a brainstorming session. We have to be a little more regimented. We'll take more content gathering. We'll kind of move through that and then discuss that with them. But what we plan to happen over those 2 days, let's say 8 hours of time together, maybe we spread out over a week or two. It can't be too long because then now you're in the same role as the analysis of things, but there needs to be some engagement. And then if not, we just prioritize the role that everyone has. If a SME is very important, but they can't be involved in the first couple of weeks, then we just bring them in a little bit later. We construct these events, these interactions, and then we ask for their help with the content. I think that would be the best way of handling it. I know I spent a lot of time on this one, and it looks small relative to the whole process, but there is nothing more important than how you start the process. And the Savvy Start is how you would do that. Then we move from the Savvy Start where we've engaged in brainstorming and we've come up with these prototypes, and we're starting to think through how we're going to build these out. And we move into the iterative design phase, where a little bit of project planning is in place. I mean, we have a better grasp now that we've come through the Savvy Start on what's required of us. What are we going to do? What are we not going to do? What might we want to change? What do we need to prototype out more? We'll create an objectives to treatment matrix. And so all of those instructional objectives that we all love to construct, we'll align those to the type of interactions that we prototyped in the Savvy Start or may need to prototype in this additional design phase as we move through. And so we're going to iterate through this, prototype, review it, design something new, kind of keep looping through and looping through. The critical thing is we're going to take one interaction, peel everything back. There's a lot of things going on here, but one interaction, and we're going to iterate it 3 times. We're going to come up with a basic design. We're going to review it with the team. We're going to challenge ourselves. We're going to improve it one more time. And then we're going to do it the 3rd time. After that, we found that the next several times is really, we're just tweaking things that might be interface or media. The gain isn't as high. We could do it forever, but the gain after about the 3rd one really falls flat. But we have to remember in this prototyping is we're not just coming up with a good idea and moving through 3 prototypes to figure out how it functions, how it works, but we're challenging whether this meets the objectives and whether it improves the performance and demonstrates that performance for the learner. And if it doesn't, we throw it away. It's a prototype. It's ugly. It's black and white. It's stick figures.
Right.
We just want to get something out there that people can touch and feel and go, I got it. It doesn't even have real words in it, the first ones.
It doesn't have to be electronic.
No.
It can be whiteboard.
Whiteboard,
it can be
flip
sketch.
chart. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Those are the best ways to get out some of those initial ideas. Usually, and again, this is because we can say things to people and people can nod and say yes, but we're thinking about 2 different things completely. Right. And we won't see that until we get to the end. We need to challenge those expectations and uncover those so that we can produce a better product as we move through. So when we get done with the design, and theoretically it's never done, but when we move through design, we move into development. So now we've gotten to this moment, and our first major deliverable is that design proof. And so we're going to create a design proof, and I always like to equate it, although this is a lot more linear and tangible than it really is, but it's like right before you build a house, and you walk into the architect's office, and they've got the elevation and the blueprints, and you've got carpet samples and paint samples and all of these different things, landscape layouts, and you can see everything for the most part. You know, it's a house, you can't walk through it, but for the most part, you can see everything, and then you go, yes, go build that. And that's what the design proof is. It's a moment where all of our prototypes, all of our content grids, content gathering documents, and objective to treatment matrix, and all of those things we put together and put it on the table at one time and say, is this it? Does this cover what it needs to cover? Are we comfortable? Certainly you're not going to be 100% comfortable, but you will have worked with the team to get to a moment you feel comfortable moving into development. And then you move into it and you start working on the alpha. And so our alpha is doing our development, implement, evaluate. So that's what we want to do. We kind of did that with the design proof. Again, there were some things that we may want to clean up at the design proof. We realized, oh, by the way, that the back door coming out of the garage comes out of the side of the house and it runs right into the neighbor's. And we actually need to have it at the back of the garage. Great time for things like that. And then we build it. And we build an alpha. And an alpha is an unfilled complete course, is a good way of describing it. As much of it as complete as possible. The interface, the things that we know in terms of the scenarios and things are already in there. We may be missing some media, some high-end media that we want to make sure needs to be there and it doesn't need to change, and we'll have a placeholder and we'll note that. But it'll be a pretty substantial completed course with a menu and the navigation, and the design and development team can click through it and comment on it and challenge these designs and ideas. But we've reached a pretty good consensus because we've gone through prototypes in the design proof. So we really should be saying, yeah, this came out like we thought, or we may have to revisit this, or this is good, but in 2 more scenarios. If you'll notice, by the way, in the diagram, from the blue back to the green is one arrow that's kind of hanging around. And I like to consider that inspiration. If something happens when we've constructed this that makes us realize, what would be really good, we should have an opportunity to add that in. But it's got to go back through the design iterations. We just don't throw it in because it may not be appropriate. But that's inspiration, and that requires that we have the time and the budget and all those wonderful things that may not always be available. And we work our way through to a beta, and this one is even more complete. And in fact, for the most part, if you consider the beta the first gold release candidate, that's a better way of thinking about it. We could literally be done in beta. It could be all done, the team could be happy, we could publish it to the LMS or print out all the materials for the IoT, whatever it needs to be. But often it takes one more round. And that one more round will be with a goal. So as we move forward, we're decreasing the amount of revisions because now we're just confirming things that we made and changes in the first one. And so that's how we iterate from a savvy start through design, through development, all the way to the end of the goal release. I want to show just real quick this one slide that kind of demonstrates, and it's almost impossible, and yes, I'm not doing IoT here because I'm really using screen caps, but I wanted to demonstrate what it looks like as something moves through these iterations. And what you don't see is that we're moving this straight line through the process. I'm going to put 4 graphics up here. But this one is a prototype, and this is actually, and I always joke that this is a fancy prototype because there's like real words in there. But I'll be truthful, this is about a round 2 or a round 3 prototype of a real project, and these slides demonstrate a real project we did a handful of years ago. Or maybe not, was it a hand? It wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, it was a couple years ago.
Yeah. So we have a prototype, and this is what it looks like, and this was functional, this was built in Flash, you could click through it. And from that prototype, this is training, by the way, for a home builder to have a conversation with customers coming in. And so we went from this prototype, and there's a lot between the prototype and the alpha. I'm well aware of that, but we didn't have screen caps of those. And I just kind of wanted to move through what an alpha might be like. The structure is all there. Much of the content is there in an alpha. Truthfully, this one image could swap out for the design proof image where we do an integrated media or integrated prototype, but that we get to an alpha, it's reasonably complete. But we changed from the silhouette to a family. We actually had a chance to take some pictures, and we got images of real people, and we put them in there. We've changed the buttons on the right and a little bit of the coloring. You can kind of see how that's improved. We've added and formalized the links on the bottom at the beta. We probably, in all reality, would have done that at alpha. We didn't at this stage because we were waiting on some branding issues, and then when those were okayed, we moved into it. And then we get to the gold. You can see it just has those pieces that we had not finalized yet because we weren't sure how they were going to be treated. And I'm going to talk about content in a moment and the way that it progresses, that there are parts of the content that you don't know about. You can't really know about until you start constructing these things, whether it's instructor-led or whether it's e-learning. So I have this one slide called Managing the Project Effort. Because one of the things you can't see when you look at SAM laid out into a model is that you can't see what is the level of effort on that. And this one is the best one, I think, to describe what we're hoping to do. There are many, many decisions made early in successive approximation. And these decisions are made when times and effort are low. We're not doing a whole lot of building or constructing or media design. There's not a lot of laborers on our property building a house. I mean, it just is a good time that we could spend with designers and project managers and really spending that time to challenge ideas. So we don't spend, as we go through design proof, and these percentages, by the way, are just for demonstration. Sometimes we can move, all the way to an alpha, and it's almost a straight up effort. We have a short turnaround for an alpha, and the design proof didn't take us much to get to in terms of level of effort of the whole project. Or you can kind of see it as we've consumed this much of the project, and that's kind of what the graph is showing. But between design proof, getting to design proof, we want to spend as little effort as possible because we want to get an understanding. We want to identify expectations, and we want to do it, and we want to make mistakes, and we want people to touch and feel things when it's very inexpensive and unimpactful against the project. Against that are the expectations. And this is really where the key to SAM lies. We build behind expectations, not in front of them. And when I say that, I could go build something, and then I could ask someone, hey, do you like that? Does it work? Is this what you're wanting? And they say no, and then I have to build it again. That's really what all the processes are. So I don't want to spend much effort building something that they can see and understand and set and define their expectations with. It may be part of the brainstorming of the Savvy Start, and that we whiteboarded some design ideas to flesh out some expectations that people have. It may be as we're moving through prototyping, and we scrap one prototype and come up with another interaction to kind of work through those. It may be media, that we're doing different interface designs, that they envision the branding of this e-learning course, or the printed materials for the ILT to look a certain way, and we needed them to have examples and samples and prototypes to see. But as we are defining those, and we can do that rapidly through this, that we're building in behind expectations, which means there's less likely, not impossible, but it's less likely that we're going to have someone that's shocked or is going to cause us to have to loop back again because that's not what they agree with. Don't you find, Angel, that when we get to like an alpha, that if we have spent, the more we have spent time discovering and uncovering expectations, the easier that process is to transition from design to development? Certainly.
And so a lot of traditional approaches would have us building out huge storyboards and then spending a lot of time as instructional designers going through and making storyboards and putting together this completed design and then putting it in front of our SMEs and our audience members and our stakeholders and then having them review. But we, as instructional designers, have spent, and media artists and whoever might be helping us storyboard, have spent a vast amount of time before that even gets looked at by the SMEs. So having these bite-sized moments of, here's an interface, look at this, tell me what you want different about that. Here's an interaction, here's some content, look at this, tell me what you want different about that. So these bite-sized moments of going back and forth, and really it's a partnership, and it's not, I'm going to go off and create and then allow you to respond back to at some later point. It's the moment and the iterations of individual components. It's not an entire course that we're iterating at all times.
No, I definitely think that's a very good point. And that one of the things that we forget, and I forget often, is that especially in nowadays, with the tools that all of us have at our disposal and the access to media and information that all of us have, that people have pretty set expectations for what things should or shouldn't be. And storyboards and specification documents don't do a very good job of being clear about that as much as they used to be able to be. I just think that we have lost the ability to have a written explanation of something that aligns to a group's expectation of what it is. So we have to produce. And, well, it's easy. There are all the tools nowadays that we can rapidly produce prototypes and things, so we should do that. But if you think about it, in e-learning, I write out this storyboard. This is what this is going to do, this is what this is going to do, and I have a media treatment maybe even in there. And then I go away 6 weeks later or whatever, however long it takes someone to produce it, and I put it in front of that stakeholder, and they say, well, this isn't what I was expecting. I thought it would be X, Y, and Z, and you thought, well, I have written it out. Is no different than in an ILT, whereas you scripted out a complete ILT. I mean, the instructor will say this and this and this, and sometimes there's very prescriptive ILT. And then you give it to the one trainer that they've chosen for this course, and their personality doesn't match that. Maybe they're very gregarious and this constricted approach isn't going to work for them, and so it gets clunky and it doesn't match what the people were thinking of to begin with. So our expectations are missed both ways, unless we try things out in as real a context as we can. I wanted to have one quick talk about limit revisions, not iterations. Revisions are wonderfully deadly in an iterative process. We could revise forever. There's nothing that's going to stop any of us from finding something that we can improve on anything at any time. When we've spent 6 years on it, 6 days on it, 6 months, whatever the case is, we could always revise something. That just isn't necessarily a good idea. At some point, we have to produce a product. And so a revision is an unknown change or alteration to something that you've produced. These are my descriptions. An iteration is a purposeful change. So I iterate between a prototype 1 and a prototype 2 and a prototype 3 and an alpha and a beta. The revisions are the things that I may do inside of that to make that iteration. So change this word to this, move the graphic down lower. So these things we want to do in a collective effort to be purposeful that we're iterating moving forward. But if anyone's built any training for any period of time knows that has to stop at some point. And it always comes down to the words at the end. Well, let's rewrite this. Let's change this. Let's do that. And so iterations, or revisions, I should say, come about because people fear that the deliverable will not meet expectations. That's why we build behind expectations, not in front of them. So we're trying to get those out. Lack of serious review of the previous deliverable. I cannot imagine if you've ever had multiple deliverables in a project, not just a single lump at the end, but if you've gone through and kind of iterated with these small bite-sized pieces, that you haven't realized that someone didn't give the effort they should have in a review. Knowing, or they knew and maybe you didn't, that they were going to come back at the final and make a final choice without regard to the impact on budget and schedule, which is the same thing as a late review by an unknown stakeholder. Those are always swoopers, seagulls coming in like, oh, didn't know that was going to happen. Yeah, we weren't able to use any color blue in this course, and it's all blue, so we have to start over. So we want to identify those. Identifying expectations, by the way, and identifying all relevant stakeholders is about equal. They're very, very important. And finally, a lack of commitment. And that sounds kind of harsh, and I don't really mean it to be. We're busy people. All of us are. And when we ask other people to get involved in projects, we really need them to help out and be committed to it. And to say, hey, can you spend an hour and a half reviewing this? And maybe it's just one module out of the course. Maybe it's the whole course. Can you write up some good comments that we can use? And people want to participate. They don't want to let us down more often than not, I think. But it happens, and we get busy, and we miss, and maybe we just try, and we don't do as good, or as good of a revision or review, I should say, is not done because of the lack of commitment to it. And sometimes commitment, certainly in instructional design projects, is about scheduling and planning ahead. But these are 4 pretty much reasons why revisions pop up and why they're impactful. Again, we will revise through iterations, and that's okay. It's the ones that are just beyond the iteration, that we've moved from alpha to beta and beta to gold, and there's still these revisions coming in. Hey, I want to change this, I want to change this, I want to change this, are usually one of these 4 or some product of these 4.
And there was an earlier question before we started at how do we stop that, and how do you hit the go button and allow for, you know, not an endless loop of revisions and iterations to occur.
I think you get an LMS package version of the course as early as possible and you threaten to put it up. Or I think that you work with people, and I think that's what we'll do. And I'm going to talk about it when we get to content here. I think this helps. Content, everyone talks about content. We're always going to talk about content. Sometimes they may let go on media, sometimes they may let go on interaction, but everyone will get back to the words. And this is one of my favorite quotes. The good learning experiences aren't just about facts. They're about becoming a more proficient, capable, and valuable person. Getting back to what the product is. The product should be something that makes people proficient, capable, and for them valuable, to feel value. If it isn't, well, there's 100 different ways we can make, thousands of different ways we can make the other stuff, day in and day out. So if it's not just about the facts, then what is it about? And a handful of years ago, I made this graphic as I was trying to explain to a group in the Savvy Start when they brought in those giant 3-ring binders and set them down, I go, this stuff is great later, and I need this other stuff. This is about, 20, 10%, 5%, sometimes not even that much of the words of the content that's going to be used in this course. So you have to help me come up with the other 90 to 95% of it, and that's what we need to do. So if you can see us moving through the start, we have these giant 3-ring binders, and they're textbooks and manuals and you got them all. All of you know what they look like. And you've seen them all, and people hand them to you, and they say, hey, take this and go make training. And you can make information presentation pretty good, but you're not going to make performance change training only with that. So as we go through in the content gathering and the content grids and creating the design proof and putting together the alpha, we're creating different types of content that does not exist anywhere, because no one knew the type of interaction, no one knew the context that we were going to place people in, no one knew of these things, and we have to write and construct that. And we refer to that as giving e-learning or giving the training a voice. And so as you move through the phases, we kind of peel off the parts of the raw information that we got earlier, and we add to it instructional things like outlines, objectives, scenarios, interactive context, challenges, activities, and developmental instructions, conclusions, introductions, support and resources, these things that we know that we need to develop in order to create a good course, whether it's ILT, and this information is in ILT as much as it is in e-learning in any of the courses we design. So if you look at my effort to create content for a course, think about this graphic. It's purposeful that the curve on the right is higher than the one on the left, because we can still convey more information to the learner without having all those 3 reminders together, more information than all of that together. But we're going to do that by creating a voice and writing out scenarios and having instructions for how to move through the course and what the expectations are, and giving them resources and performance aids and things of that nature. Those things don't exist. We have to go build them, and we have to be purposeful about it. So this takes us back to the process, the model.
There's a lot of questions
Yes.
coming in of how is this any different than ADDIE?
That is the question that we have been asked for
Exactly.
a good part of it, more part of a decade, and a lot for the past 2 months.
Right.
Because we've titled the book Leaving ADDIE for Sam.
Right.
And I have become weary of wading into this conversation, because the biggest challenge is that there's either 2 ways to look at ADDIE, and it won't be the way that you're looking at it.
Right.
So we'll have an argument right now. And if there was audio on this, I would already be hearing it. ADDIE initially was constructed to support the instructional systems design idea, and that it had came out of FSU, yes, Angel, I know, and it came out of the idea that we could move through a very managed process of moving content to training, and it was specifically for those things, and in that, there were ways to devise instructional activities. And it was linear because they needed to have the approval that the analysis was right, the design was right, the development was right, the implementation was right, and the evaluation was right. And we want to have sign off on each of those. I know that that's not how it's done today. I know that. But the essence of those things are still there. The essence of, even if I connect an arrow from evaluation to design or development, I don't know when to do that. I don't have a purpose for doing that. And if you do, more power to you. But that's your ADDIE. That's not ADDIE that everyone says. And it's not so much important that what we call it or how this is different from ADDIE or not. And Michael talks about this a good bit. We are in companies and organizations and groups day in and day out all year long, and they will tell you that they're doing processes that are inefficient and that they struggle with achieving those success factors that I talked about earlier and aren't capable of doing that. And they need to have a new way. They feel like maybe what they're doing is ADDIE, and they agree with it, because who wouldn't agree that you should analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate? And they do, but they need to go to the next step, and they need to do something different. And they need to have a way that can acknowledge the realities of the design environment they work in. And so that was my most politically correct non-answer of how this is different from ADDIE. It is substantially different from what most of us have been trained and believe ADDIE is. Even if we take the mid-'80s, late '80s, early '90s adaptation of ADDIE and made it more circular, and added some more arrows to it. ADDIE always required that there was an underlying design methodology. And whatever methodology you chose, that's what the effectiveness of it. Even if you called it ADDIE, underneath it you might be doing something that you were doing something different. Because ADDIE is really at this most level, it's either an ISD model or it's just a series of tasks that all of us do every day with major tasks in our lives. And yes, SAM would follow the idea that we want to analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. Our idea is that we're doing it at a microscopic level, that a prototype is ADDIE all the way through, and it may only take 5 minutes.
Right, and I think SAM puts a bigger emphasis on the E. You know, so ADDIE has the A at the beginning, so analysis, is the forefront. A lot of us spend a lot of our time doing the analysis part, but E is all the way at the end if you followed it as a waterfall process. But we will analyze and we will evaluate. Did we get that analysis right? We will design and we will evaluate. Did we get that design right? We will develop and we will evaluate. Did we get that interaction working right? And there's a constant evaluation loop that's going along there. And so SAM gives us a process by which we can follow using all of the techniques of instructional design, whether we call that ADDIE or we call it it's not DADDIE, it's not AEID, IE, AEIE, go back and forth.
So my real answer would be I don't know of an instructional prescription or expectation that ADDIE in general has, whereas SAM has the three big M's in context, challenge, activity, feedback. We know what we want to do, and this process helps us do that. And that is different. Regardless of the ADDIE you choose or what your adaptation of it is, you've had to apply a product concept and said that's what this does. That's not generally agreed upon, and certainly we wouldn't have any way of knowing it. And I don't think it's necessary to debate whether this is or isn't ADDIE or the difference. My personal belief is that if you choose a process that's predicated on 5 major tasks or not, SAM is different because we make ourselves, and the process makes you prove out that each of those things are correct. Someone can't approve it. You have to prove it. If you come up with a design, you have to prove that it works by developing it, implementing, evaluating it, and then analyzing it again. If you come up with a treatment, you have to prove out it works. Content, you have to prove out it works. That's what we're doing. We're challenging constantly, identifying expectations, and proving out that things work. Those are possibly happening in other projects or processes, I'm sorry. I just don't know how they would be done formally across the industry, and we're trying to have a standardized model. And I will answer this question again 5,000 times over the next year.
Well, you don't need to be defensive about it.
Well, I mean, I don't know. It's almost unanswerable because there's so many people have so many different definitions of ADDIE that, and I think Michael says it most effectively and most graciously. If whatever you're doing produces the highest quality product that you can think of, you should not stop doing that. And we agree. And probably would agree that you should write us and send us that process so we could see how that works. But we were moving from, with Michael, more of an agile process, more of a software development. And then we kind of backed into, we have this belief that good instruction is created this way. Can these agile concepts support us?
Right. And I think that when I and I'll say this every single time somebody talks to me about joining Allen Interactions, but it was a mothership calling me home for a number of different reasons. But one of the reasons is that I always had to backfill the work that I was doing to some sort of project plan that somebody else had developed for something that had nothing to do with learning. Had nothing at all to do with learning. And there was a series of tasks and charts and analysis that I had to do. And when I came here and we had successive approximation and Savvy and all the processes that Allen Interactions had been using for years, I was like, finally, it's a process that's built for instructional design.
Right. And it would be difficult for us to ever have the conversation about. Now, you can do some good decision. You can build some good things. You might even be able to build a nice house or plan an event or something. You would probably be able to do SAM to implement something like a non-instructional event. But we would never have a conversation about instruction that didn't include what we expect to create. They're one and the same. There is no difference. The process allows us to create what we believe needs to be done to have the most engaging learning events. And so I'll steal another quote from Michael, that threatening and disorienting as change can be, and that was a good setup, by the way, Angel, I appreciate that. I don't know if you planned that. It seems there are many reasons to aspire to something better. This may be a stepping stone. Like I said before, SAM is something that is a living, breathing process for us. The implementation and execution of that in our partnerships is something that we reflect upon daily. But we believe that for the most part, what we've presented and what we continue to present in our ASTD trainings and all these other things are really the best way to facilitate and make your job easier when it comes to designing instruction. Whether you're a one-person shop or a major, large corporation that you're just, you know, in an instructional design department or in a department that needs to create it, any one of those, we feel very comfortable that can help you out. Are there any?
There are lots of questions. We have tons of questions.
We have a few minutes. You want to throw those?
We have a few minutes. Yeah, I think that we can take this time to answer some of the questions that have come in, and we have a few of them we've been flagging for coming back to answer. The first one that I would like for your input on is what happens, is there some sort of process mechanism in SAM that has been designed for those challenges, the late, the swoopers that come in, you know, how do we react? How flexible is SAM in reacting to those kinds of challenges?
Well, SAM is flexible.
Right.
Your budget and timeline are not. And so, again, as everyone knows, you have three things. You have scope, budget, and time. And if someone comes in late, at least we would consider the ways to be able to manage that using SAM. But I will tell you that more often than not, the way to deal with those is to really challenge the expectation that you know everyone that's going to come in as early and often. It will never go to zero, but reduce the risk of it to as little as possible. So if every 53rd project has someone swoop in, then you've done yourself a great deal. If every other project does, there's something wrong. And it may be an organizational challenge. It may be, you know, there are things, there are a lot of reasons for it. But if you can at least do that, probably if I was to truthfully answer the question, while the process gives me the vehicle to go back in and to identify how we can kind of loop through that, maybe a beta 2, those kind of bad phrases that we have around here, it would be the design of the product that would give me the flexibility to manage and work within. Externalizing content, externalizing media, you know, having that. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. But our discussion about process, it would be somewhat process, but most would be the design of the product.
Right. Okay. Another question, and we only have 5 more minutes left.
Okay.
Let me pull one of them. Prototypes. Yes. If you could give a definition of prototype and some best practices for creating and how to create a prototype for either or for ILT or for learning events in general. What is a prototype? How do you create one?
A prototype is a bite-sized, rapidly developed expression of interactivity. And I say expression, and I'm going to give you an example. This was many years ago, and there were 4 of us. And we had a Flash developer with us, and 2 designers and a producer. And we were at a savvy start with a client. And we broke, as we normally do during the day, and the Flash developer was constructing a prototype in Flash. And it was reasonably complicated, but still a prototype, but the functionality was there. I created one in PowerPoint. So it was just, you know, it's a prototype, it's a smoke and mirrors. It looked like things were moving and you had choices, and I had a little bit of that, but it's mostly just PowerPoint, only had 30 minutes. 5 minutes before the client walks back in, the other instructional designer says, I have another great idea. And I said, well, we have 5 minutes. He said, I know what I'll do. The developer pulled up the Flash. We walked through it with the client. We had a lot of discussion, made some revisions to it. I pulled my PowerPoint up. We discussed it. Obviously, there were more limitations because it was in PowerPoint, but we had a good discussion on maybe that interactivity. My instructional designer friend pulls up a Word document that they had typed in a series of comments, and then we're dragging graphics in Word around with the handles and everything, as ugly as it was, as clunky as it was constructed in 4 minutes. And the client got the idea and that's what we took and built the next prototype. So those are 3 different expressions of interactivity that we did at that one moment, from using simply a Word document all the way up to a Flash prototype. But with all the tools that are out there nowadays, everyone can build prototypes. And design and sketch. We talk about that in the book a lot. Sketch. It's great. Get on a whiteboard, draw it out. Don't spend a lot of time making it electronic or any otherwise, because you may see some flaws when you start putting things together.
Right. And I think it really answers the question of what do we want the learners to do in this moment? What is the performance that we're looking for somebody to perfect or to practice in this moment.
And does this activity, does this challenge, this interaction, does that emulate that well enough and allow them to practice that performance? That's really, yes, you're right. That's what we're thinking of. And where does the feedback and how does that work? And what does the challenge look like? And what's the context replacement? Those are what starts out when the prototypes start being constructed.
Yeah, and by feedback, consequences. What happens, you know, if I'm having a conversation with you and you cross your arms or you look down or, okay.
So last one?
Yeah, we have 2 minutes left. And I think that also one thing that we would like, and what I've really benefited from recently is our new Zebras apps and using that as a prototyping tool.
Yeah.
So that's another option that we have available to us.
Yeah, we have, that will be certainly as it is in its growing and building and online and a cloud-based solution that is fast and easy and high media.
So easy.
But we're trying to cram so many things into this 1 hour talk I didn't know about. But you can find out more.
Right.
Both you can get the Leaving Addy for Sam book at astd.org. It's an ASTD publications book. You can get it at Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, or you can go to our website and find out a whole bunch of information, including information about Zebras apps and other things that we do at Allen Interactions.
And there's a lot of questions that we weren't able to get to during this time here. So we're going to pull those questions for us. We're going to have you answer them.
Okay.
And then we're going to put them out to the folks
Fantastic.
that have been on this call.
Well, thank you everyone for the opportunity to have this conversation. Again, I know there's so many things that we could talk about with Sam, from the instructional design concepts to how to execute and implement a process that is efficient and effective, that supports collaboration, that is iterative, and that certainly drives towards a quality product that you believe in. So have a wonderful day, and we'll get to those questions as soon as we can.